So good morning, all. Again, we want to be respectful of the most important people who are here early. Welcome to this session, Enabling Remedy Strategies for Effective Implementation of IFC and MIGA's Interim Remedial Action Framework. I am Carla Garcia Zendejas. I am Deputy Director at the Bank Information Center and will be moderating today's session. First and foremost, I want to appreciate our co-sponsors for this session, which are Accountability Council, African Coalition for Corporate Accountability, Arab Watch Coalition, also Bank Information Center, Inclusive Development International, and Recourse. We will be having this session first. We're going to be setting some context where we are, and then some answers to some questions that we've thought of before today to move the conversation. They won't be individual presentations. I wanted to, again, appreciate that you're here on this last day of the Civil Society Policy Forum, and really think about the fact that this is to the week. It was on the 15th of April last year, a year that the Remedial Action Framework was published, released, which was a momentous occasion. And I was saying this to Manuel, it's still worth celebrating. We should be celebrating. There are moments in life where we have to think about the positive things, and it is a positive thing. It is a momentous thing, a historic thing for a development finance, an international finance institution. And it comes as no surprise to everyone that the chaos of the world and the situation that we're living in is different than we were a year ago, very different. And that just proves that the constant definitely is change. I'm a great fan of the writer Octavia Butler, and for her, God is change, and the only constant in change, the only truth is change. But by the same token, the way that we approach this change and the way that we act in the midst of this change is how we're going to shape the future. And so at this moment, where not only is the world in this more fragile situation with wars, with even more fragility and death and just so many specific moments of vulnerability, this is a moment to reflect with us and take this opportunity to really think about how we can again come together. The bank, the IFC, the accountability mechanisms are in complete and utter flux at this moment as well. So if this isn't the moment, then when, no? And so with that, I'm going to introduce the speakers and illustrious people who you can Google also, because we're not going to go into great detail because we want to take advantage of the time. So to my right, Megan Pearson is Policy Associate at Accountability Council, and the person who's been wrangling us and getting us together for this panel, which we appreciate very much. On my far left, Anthony Cotton, Senior Advisor on Development Finance Institutions at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. On my far right, Natalie Bugalski, Senior Legal and Policy Director and co-founder of Inclusive Development International. And just to my left, Emmanuel Boulay, Senior Manager or Head? Senior Manager of Stakeholder Engagement and Grievance Response at the International Finance Corporation. And we were reflecting on this also yesterday, that we've been on these panels many times before, discussing remedy, discussing accountability, discussing specific cases. So today what we really want to do is do a check of where we are, why we got here again, and see how those lessons and the lessons that we're learning today are taking us into the future. So to start, we're going to Megan to remind ourselves about that famous remedy gap and what that means and what that is.
Thank you, Carla. Good morning, everyone. So just to jump right into it, accountability mechanisms at development finance institutions have been proliferating over the last 30 years. And so 30 years later now, we're able to see that even though these mechanisms offer communities a process for filing complaints, and they often confirm the harms that communities are experiencing, they've rarely seemed to produce meaningful remedy for those communities. And this is something that communities and their advocates, including some of the people sitting here at this table, have known anecdotally for a long time through our case experience. But now we've actually, Accountability Council, in partnership with others, have done a study using the database of IAM complaints that we maintain, as well as interviews with communities who have used IAMs to get a more systemic look at the long-term outcomes of IAM processes. So our question was essentially, are IAM processes resulting in meaningful remedy for complainants? And the answer we found was yes, communities are getting remedy through these processes, but not nearly enough compared to the scale of the harm. We found that as complaints move through the IAM process, they funnel down in number, from the number of complaints filed to the number of complaints that are found eligible to the number of complaints that actually produce some sort of an output, so a compliance review report or a dispute resolution agreement, and then finally down at the bottom, the smallest number, the number of complaints that we can actually verify have had any of those remedial commitments implemented. And this was confirmed through the interviews with communities around the world that we did. Even when an IAM process resulted in a management action plan or a dispute resolution agreement, the community often felt that even when those were implemented, the harm that they had actually complained about was not addressed through that process. And so when we talk about the remedy gap, we mean this lack of predictable, meaningful, and consistent remedy for project-related harm.
Thank you, Megan. So people are getting, people who get to that end of the road, even if it's not the same people who knocked on the door, are getting some type of remedy. So to understand what some of these communities are getting or what remedy entails, we're going to go to Anthony now.
Great. Thanks, Carla. Thanks for having me on the panel, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to start with the basics. I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, but I do think, especially on this conversation, there are some misconceptions, so it's important that we just sort of get on the same page for a baseline. I think we all know DFIs have mandates to support development and to do no harm, and yes, despite best efforts, sometimes negative environmental and social impacts occur, and so remedy is just about addressing those negative impacts and figuring out solutions. So generally speaking, clients have the primary responsibility for managing those risks and these impacts, and for implementing and funding remedy to address them. DFIs play the essential role of using their leverage, whether it's contractual, relationship, or financial leverage, to compel or encourage clients to act. And of course, in a case where the DFI itself has contributed to a harm, basic principles of fairness and justice suggest that yes, the DFI also should contribute to solutions and to remedy alongside the client. So if you've contributed to a problem, you should contribute to the solution, right? That's what remedy is about. Remedy is about finding solutions. It's not about blame. It's not about judicial proceedings. It's not about litigation. It's about coming together and figuring out a solution to something that was unintended. So examples of remedy might include restoring people to their land. It might include providing health services to survivors of gender-based violence, commemorations if a sacred site is destroyed, compensations tied to costs of goods and services needed to repair a harm, and also things like commitment to non-repetition. That's what remedy is, but we also find, as I said, there's so many misconceptions about remedy, so I just want to take a minute to talk about what remedy is not. As implemented, it's not about fault or legal liability, as I mentioned. It's not the equivalent of writing a blank check, which is an idea that's out there in the zeitgeist. It does not lead to bankruptcy. It does not negatively impact a DFI's credit rating. It does not need to raise any moral hazard concerns when done right. So most importantly, it's not a zero-sum proposition. When it's done right, it can be a win-win-win for DFIs, for clients, and for project-affected people. And specifically for DFIs, what we found is that having a transparent, consistent, and robust approach to remedy can bring about developmental and reputational benefits, because quickly remedied grievances are far less likely to result in spiraling harms or public relations problems. So I'm going to pause there. There's much more we'll talk about, but all of these points are summarized in our new report, which came out about 3 weeks ago. It's an analytical brief on remedy for DFIs written by my brilliant colleague, Margaret Wachenfeld, and I encourage you to pick it up and read it to get a little bit more background. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And so if it's not meant to create the famous risks, why should IFC, why should corporations, which are the clients of the IFC, contribute or get involved into remedy? What is the business case or the arguments? And we're bringing these things up because sadly they continue to be questions or raised as it's still out there. So what are the arguments that we need to give them, Natalie?
Thanks, Carla. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Carla, and Megan and Anthony for your comments so far. So, just to begin to answer this question, I just want to say first, I'm a human rights lawyer. My motivation for what I do and my career, my whole career, is the costs on communities of the impacts of IFC projects and the costs that fall on them when they don't, when they experience the harms and remedy isn't forthcoming. But that said, the research is really very clear that a failure to address community grievances early is creating company-community conflict that is increasingly posing financial risk to investment projects. And the research is also predicting that it's going to get a lot worse over the next decade unless there's a change in approach. And really that change should be led by IFC and the World Bank Group. So we know that IFC is increasing its investments and exposure to high-risk projects, including and maybe particularly mining for transition and critical minerals. And we also know that about 50% of projected mining sites for these minerals overlap with Indigenous land. Now that is creating a perfect storm for conflict. So the question are IFC's E&S risk management systems and the way it approaches harms and the way, where its preparedness to deal, to provide remedy, is it ready and fit for purpose for, the next decade or so that we're going to see with this community-company conflict? So what we're also seeing in the research, and this comes from the Institute for Development Studies, is that community conflict around mines is increasing. So between 2015 and 2022, the IDS researchers identified 36,000 mining-related conflicts across 4,300 locations worldwide. And just to, that data set that they were looking at was only English-speaking media reports. So really the numbers are much higher than that. And they found that 2/3 of those conflicts were characterised by protests, blockades and violence, and often led to project delays and shutdowns. And just to say, there's also research that shows that this applies to other types of high-risk projects where there's, land-intensive investment projects in the energy and infrastructure sectors. But because of the energy transition, a lot of the research is focusing on mining. So what that IDS analysis is showing is that community concerns are not being addressed by developers appropriately and early, and so they escalate over time. So what may have been sort of simmering concerns by the communities that could have been addressed by mediation, for instance, providing benefits, listening to them respectfully and dealing with their issues, explodes into outright community opposition for projects. So then we get the protests, the blockades, litigation, campaigns, and these have serious material impacts. And, we see that in our own work. We see how communities sort of fears, concerns, frustrations really harden over time when they're not dealt with respectfully. So from a financial perspective, the implications are clear. And this comes from a 2014 report that a lot of people still cite by Shift and the Harvard Kennedy School, which found that serious community conflict can cost large-scale mining developers roughly $20 million per week of delayed production in net present value terms. And increasingly, this impact on net present value is leading to stranded assets or the sale of mining licences at huge losses. If I just have a moment, Carla, I just wanted to tell you, I was discussing this with our research director, and he said, look, I've just happened to come across a case that really shows this problem. And he wasn't looking for this. He just happened to be researching the case for different reasons. But it really anecdotally suggests how common this problem likely is. So this involves AngloGold Ashanti mine in Colombia, the La Cosa mine. And AngloGold Ashanti spent more than $500 million trying to develop this mine. But it faced massive community distrust over the years, and it really didn't deal with those community tensions and suspicions from the get-go. So that opposition hardened and eventually made it unviable for AngloGold Ashanti to move past the exploration phase. So just a few weeks ago, it sold its mine for $10 million. So it had put in $500 million to develop the mine, and it sold it for $10 million. And that doesn't count for the money ACCA, the company, walked away from. Those gold deposits are valued at more than $100 billion. And just to say, that could have easily been an IFC investment, because we know that IFC is in fact exposed to AngloGold Ashanti through a major intermediary in South Africa. So this type of thing is a real financial risk to IFC. And just one more interesting thing about this case is that the mine that bought that AngloGold Ashanti concession, Mineros, said in its press release around the transaction that its purchase of the mine reflects its responsible, well-governed mining and track record of constructive engagement with communities. So it knew what was going wrong and what it needs to do. And so Mineros gets this, but clearly a lot of companies and clearly a lot of IFC clients don't get it. And that's why IFC needs to be prepared to use its leverage and actively work with its clients to prevent harm in the first place. And when harm does happen, it needs to act quickly to ensure full and effective remedy before that community-company conflicts escalates into these sort of blockades of the projects. And just to say that I see that commercial banks look to IFC to be on top of those E&S risks, including taking a leadership role on remedy. So they can rely on IFC for their own due diligence and approach. So I'll leave it at that, but clearly just to say that the RAF, although it's pretty vague, it's a really important opportunity to look forward at these risks that we're going to see, including the financial risks, and address them.
Thank you, Natalie. And you covered a lot, and so we know that you've brought this, many of us in this room have brought many of these issues to IFC and in the past and in the present. And again, the response with the adoption, the political will, the moment the stars aligned for the adoption of the Remedial Action framework, it's here. It exists. If you want to carry it with you at all times, you can also do that. But what does it say? What does it do? Again, nothing's going to be perfect. None of us are perfect. But it exists, and so I'll turn to Emmanuel to tell us what it entails.
No, thanks, Carla, and great to see you all this morning. First, before I answer your question, I need to say two things. The first one is I need to manage expectations here. I think you saw the RAF so much that I really need to make sure that we all know what it is. And I think somebody at the session of the CSPF yesterday used the word honest salesman. That's what I want to be. I want to make sure we know what we are talking about. And the other thing is, in your introduction, you say change is the only thing constant. Yeah, I mean, when you presented me ACCA. ACCA doesn't exist anymore.
Well, you see.
The stakeholder engagement and grievance redress unit. I'm now at the SPAG, accountability grievances with makers, and there is equivalent with the checkers. So I mean, the new organization mean that things have changed also, and yeah, we have a new organization. Just on the RAF itself, and in terms of managing expectations, this framework, I think it took us 5 years of conversation to get there.
5 years and 30 years, 35.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not counting about
Yes.
all the
Case.
case. Yeah. No, but the conversation around what it is, it took us the last 5 years, and it's an evolution. It's not a revolution. It's really a step forward, but it doesn't resolve every equation. And I just want to be clear about that. There are still many things that are not clear, and things we'll have to continue discussing on the framework itself, on specific cases too, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, and that's the complicated. I mean, exactly what does it mean when we have real issues? But just to take a step back and say, okay, what is a RAF and why does it exist? I mean, the RAF is a structural approach to addressing harm arising from ENS impact of projects that IFC Omega support. So there is harm that is being recognized, and the RAF is proposing some form of approach on how to address this harm. It does reflect IFC MEGA recognition that as a development finance institution, we have a broader responsibility. And when projects we support cause harm, affected community deserve a meaningful response. That's really what is at the core of the RAF. Also to clarify, this is an interim approach. This is not a final policy. There have been a lot of conversation about it, and including with the board. And the board was very clear on the fact that they didn't feel that we are at the stage where we can have a final policy. We need to have those principles we have in the RAF. We have to see how they work in practice, what we can do, and then we'll come back in 2 or 3 years with a policy proposal. Right now, we are experimenting. Also, the RAF doesn't change the fundamental principle, which is that IFC, MEGA clients, are the party responsible to provide a remedy. And I know there have been a lot of back and forth, a lot of conversation around that. The RAF doesn't change that. Providing a remedy is a client's responsibility. But it defines how IFC and MEGA can use our influence, our leverage, our resources to support the remedial process, even when the client is in the driving seat. I mean, what can IFC MEGA do to support positive outcome on the remedial process? I have many other things to say, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on 2 things right now. That what the RAF says, how IFC MEGA will contribute or is already contributing. The RAF draw a distinction between 2 modes of contribution. One is influence and leverage, and the other is enabling activities. Influence and leverage, Natalie mentioned that. This is obviously very important. There is a lot of conversation we are having on influence and leverage in the past, and we continue, we can delve in. But into that, if there is interest on the conversation, but maybe the innovation of the RAF is more in terms of the second type of contribution, which are enabling activities, which are how IFC will help, or IFC and MIGA, are helping to enable remedy when there is harm. The RAF mentioned 3 of them: fact findings, technical assistance, and community development activities. We are currently implementing these 3 modes in different processes, being dispute resolution, being compliance, being direct complaints. I will be happy to go into more detail about that if there is some interest. Obviously, management action plan at the end of a compliance process, is a major instrument we use, but it's not the only one. It's also, as I mentioned, dispute resolution. I'm very happy to see Knox at the front row here, or our direct complaints processes, which are also good. I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
No, don't stop, because I still have questions. There's follow-up questions, because you've mentioned some of the things that Natalie also brought up about leverage and the influence that the IFC has, and you touched on how IFC's already working on this with some DR, dispute resolution or compliance review cases. So if you could tell us how it's being implemented. We know that the pilot phase is 3 years. We still have time, so you know that we want to know everything. So anything and everything that you could tell us. You don't have to name names, but we would love names of cases or people or what is happening and how the pilot is going.
How long do I have, Carla? 5 minutes?
If you're going to tell us things, I think we will just...
None of us.
Yeah, none of us would talk. Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure, because I
No, that was the alarm, but ignore the alarm. It doesn't matter.
Good. It's good.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I just want to make sure you know it.
Doesn't matter.
No, but the first thing is the RAF, as I say, is an evolution, is not a revolution. We still need to put our house in order to be able to implement it. And it may sound very mundane, but the first thing we need to do is to put the plumbery. Where requests come, where it's going, who makes a decision about what, all these very boring processes, but which are very important for a bureaucracy. And this is what I call plumbing. But this plumbing, the problem is right now we are doing a big renovation to the house.
Big renovation.
A very, very big renovation.
Yes.
And because of that, let's say the plumbing has been a little bit delayed.
Mm-hmm.
We have been distracted. We're still working on that. This is obviously very critical. I mean, we need to have the plumbing in place before we can actually make sure everything is working. We know we have the plans. We know we have good idea what the plumbing should look like. This plan has to be changed because of the changes in the house plans, but we're still moving forward with what it should look like. To be more concrete, sorry. I mean, I'm using shortcuts here, but the RAF called for a directive. This directive is being worked out. We have draft. We need to make sure this is moving forward with the approval. Also, the RAF called for key KPIs, key performance indicators that we need to define and to submit to the board. We have been working very closely with our colleagues from CEO of trying to define those KPIs. We have made a proposal to the board. The board providing some comments. We are revising them, and if there is any suggestion there, very happy also to take that. What I want to say on this issue of the KPIs is that the key issue is to strike the right balance between annual KPIs that we can report to the board to be able to show progress, and which are meaningful and measurable, but also trying to see how we can introduce outcome-based indicators to inform whether the interim approach is working as intended and to inform the final assessment at the end of the RAF. But outcome indicators, they don't fall out of the skies. I remember yesterday there was very, I think Elena say something about the fact that they want to have outcome, but when they see outcomes, they don't recognize that. We need also to think, okay, what are the outcome indicators? How we can measure them? Who is going to do that? Obviously, CEO will have a very strong role in measuring outcome on CEO cases, but this is not easy. That's what I'm trying to say. So we into this process of the KPI conversation. I hope we'll be able to close that chapter soon and have a KPIs framework approved. But also what will be very important will be the final independent evaluation at the end of the 2 years to inform what has been working, what has not been working. So that's more on the framework itself, but that's obviously, as I say, we need to have our hours in order to be able to operate, and we have been slightly distracted. In terms of actual implementation of the enabling activities, we were already implementing some part of the RAV before we had it approved, and that was particularly in the context of management action plan. One of the biggest, the first community development program we did is in the context of the bridge case. Whatever one can think about the case, that was the first time that IFC is actually moving independently of a client in doing a community development program for the better good, and I think Megan was referencing that, or Anthony. Actually, I think it was Anthony, but about providing services to community on GBV. That's exactly what we are trying to do, and I'm very happy to say that last week we signed the grant agreement with UNFPA, which at last will able to implement actual services for community affected by survivors of GBV on that, and we are following that. We are very close also to having a grant agreement with UNICEF on that. I know it has been long in the making. I know I see people in the room also. We have had a very strong contribution into what it should look like, so thank you for that. But this is the first of this community development program here we are implementing. There will be lessons to be learned from that. We are also in the process of trying to have another one in the context of the Selala map, plantation, rubber plantation in Liberia. We went pretty wrong and so we also see how we can implement a community development program there. It's very complicated because we have not had a client for 5 years. Our previous client was bought by a new owner who is also a local company, not a national company. It's not somebody we are having any business with. And the communities are living, I would say, in the plantation. And so to be able to access the communities, to be able to provide GBV services, we will need to get the new owner on board. And that's very complicated because it's not a client. And we, as we are implementing on that, we are already on the boundaries of, first, IFC has a competitive advantage when it's about to talk about client. IFC has no competitive advantage when it's about to do community program, because this is not our line of business. So it's already a little bit hard for us, but we are doing it. But in this context where we don't have any partner, it's very challenging. And right now, I'm sorry to report that we have very little progress to report on the implementation, because we are trying to find solution, which is not easy. And in a way that comes to my second point here, which is, in a way it has been much easier, not in the context of a compliance process, but in the context of a DA process. And the reason why is because there is a structured process already with a DA. There there is already a parties, there is a client, there is a complainant, there is a process, and it, in the context of DARE, it has been the party which has been asking us, which is not necessarily easier to implement, but it's easier to define. Okay, this is what we can do, and we can say yes or no. We cannot do. That's what we can do. That's what we cannot do. But it's much easier that being at the end of the road, have a compliance process, which took a long time, and be there without any client, with any partner, and you have to do something. It's very difficult. It has been. I mean, that part has proved very, very difficult. In the context of a DARE, it's not easy, but at least there is a structured process that exists and on which we can plug in. So that's happening because DARE process or confidential process, I don't want to have to take the risk of saying anything. If Knox wants to share anything, very happy, but I don't want to share anything at this point. We have also failed attempt, and I think I see Aaron in the room, I see Natalie and David. We had a conversation the other day about that. In the context of the RCBC case, we attempted an enabling activity. It didn't work. It completely failed. And I think we need also to take lesson about that. What didn't work and why? This enabling activity didn't enable anything at the end. So what does it mean? How we take lesson about that and make sure that as we are implementing more enabling activities, we are able to do better. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I wasn't even looking in that direction, and I know, Natalie, that you have thoughts. But before your response, I wanted to say that the appreciation that this was not going to be easy to begin with. Providing remedy for a community and having a community get an opportunity to engage, to be able to tell you what it is that would remedy the harm, was not going to be easy. But I will commiserate it and say the fact that you are beginning with the Bridge Academy's case is sadly. I mean, it's an opportunity to really jump in, but it is exponentially more complex than, I don't know if we can ever talk about an easy moment, but I think that's not lost on any of us. But with that, I just wanted to go to Natalie. If you wanted to I'm going to change the order a bit to have some reactions to this acknowledgement of this failed attempt, perhaps, or other moments.
Sure.
On what happens and what is it that those examples with communities look like.
Okay. So, I mean, just to say, I mean, maybe I'll just say a few things about the Bridge case. And just to start, it's a very difficult case, very complex, very sad, a highly mismanaged case by the IFC in ways that we don't have time to go into. But I mean, and I do want to give credit for, as you say, Emmanuel, IFC going in there without the client and establishing a program to offer services to survivors of sexual assault and rape at schools that IFC was providing financial support for. Now, that said, I want to make clear that is not a substitute for remedy. So, those two things, can be true. That, it is really good, and I'm encouraged to see IFC take the action that it has in terms of forming this grant agreement with UNFP, and I think you said UNICEF, and I think it's great that these services will be available to survivors. But the complainants to the CAO on this case do not feel that they have received anything. They do not feel that the abuses that they suffered have been redressed, remedied in any way. And in fact, just recently, conversations with them, have been really disheartening because, they're quite burnt out from the process of trying to seek accountability and remedy. So those two things can be true at the same time, I think. And I do think it's important as we move forward with the implementation of the RAF that, it's fine to be thinking about contribution to remedy through, well-tailored community development funds where communities are involved in the design of them and have expressed that they feel good about that outcome. But we cannot say that, service provision, certain programs that are set up are okay as substitute for remedy when the victims, the survivors, affected communities, whatever it may be, are not feeling like the issues are addressed. So I just wanted to make that comment on Bridge. Maybe I'll pivot to where I see IFC having done really good things in a couple of cases, so that Emmanuel doesn't completely hate me by the end of the week. But and I'll talk about two cases here, both CAO cases, both financial intermediary cases. That went through DR, dispute resolution at the CAO. So the first is the Anglo Gold Ashanti case, so the same company I was talking about before, but this time this involved a gold mine in northern Guinea, and this mine led to the violent forced evictions of an artisanal mining community in northern Guinea to make way for the expansion of mining. And we identified an IFC exposure to this mine through a commercial bank in South Africa. And that allowed the community to file a complaint to the CAO, and which we helped them to do with partners in Guinea in 2017. And through a lot of pressure, a lot of work, we were able to get the company to the table in negotiation. So the mediations kicked off in 2018, and it lasted for 6 years. And along the way, we reached several agreements on access to water, on education, on health, etc., a number of issues. And then in 2024, we reached a final comprehensive agreement with the company, which included a multi-million-dollar financial settlement, which was comprised of individual compensation payments to households, and the establishment of a fund for community-led livelihood development projects. Okay. Now, I've made it sound kind of easy, but in fact, it was very difficult to get to that point. There was a lot of work along the way to reach that resolution. But what I want to focus on, of course, is what did IFC do in that case to enable that outcome, to enable remedy? And I think I can boil it down to 3 really important things that IFC did. Okay, one was that it was an observer to the dispute resolution process from the beginning, and the RAF talks about this, and I think that that's really important. Of course, it's up to the communities, but we generally find it to be very helpful that IFC is an observer to mediation processes, both because I think it does place a degree of pressure on the client or the sub-client, and it also helps IFC with its supervision of the performance standards applications, which of course should be aligned with what the community is asking for in mediation and the outcomes of that mediation. Okay, so the second thing that happened in this case was that when the parties were at loggerheads in the mediation about the facts around resettlement and around compensation, around the resettlement process and what went right and what went wrong, what we could agree to is to hire an independent expert to conduct a resettlement audit and sort of decide, as sort of an arbiter, what were the gaps in the performance standards and what was owed, if anything, to the communities. So the company in this case did agree to pay for an expert, but we had the problem of ensuring the impartiality and the independence of the expert. So we didn't want the company to be contracting with the expert because the community would lose trust in that process. So IFC stepped in, and this was very helpful, to provide arm's length procuring and contracting of the expert. And that really helped to move things forward and to build trust. So I encourage that to happen, when that's needed in cases. And in some cases, the company may be refusing to pay for the expert, and the IFC has a role to play there. That's also mentioned in the RAF. Okay, so in this case, the expert conducted a very comprehensive study, and I won't go into the details, they're confidential and we don't have enough time. But I can say that study and the recommendations laid the evidentiary basis for reaching that final agreement, and it was very important. But we weren't there yet. And the third thing IFC did to help us get to that outcome, to the agreement, was to offer, at our request, to provide the community technical assistance to prepare a feasible livelihood development plan. So effectively a roadmap to invest settlement funds in a way that will have the greatest positive impact for the affected families. And that was crucial, firstly because the communities needed that support. We want to make sure that those settlement funds are used in a sustainable and feasible way and it's not squandered. But also, when we were negotiating that final agreement, the fact that IFC had offered to do this gave the company confidence that it could agree to transfer significant funds with the knowledge that an IFC backed expert would be assessing the projects to make sure the projects sort of proposed by the communities to make sure that they were feasible. It would be vetted by a World Bank expert. So that provision of IFC technical assistance really helped us cement the agreement. So it's another good example. Very quickly, because I've probably taken up too much time, I just want to mention one more case, the Hagel case. And this is another case where we've seen IFC step in to do the right thing, although we haven't reached a full agreement yet in this case. I'm not going to say too much about what's happening. It's a live case. We're at a sensitive moment. But we are seeing still IFC being proactive and creative in its use of leverage. So it's an FI case involving a private equity fund and two commercial banks that IFC was invested in. And they provided financing to a Vietnamese agribusiness company that grabbed and destroyed thousands of hectares of Indigenous people's lands. So we filed this complaint back in 2014, which is pretty shocking, 12 years. And the DR process is still ongoing. So not only has IFC been an observer to this entire DR process, but it has actively supported the DR process by forming a direct relationship with the subclient. Of course, it originally didn't have any relationship with the subclient. And it's actively tried to persuade the subclient, to settle using a mix of sticks and carrots. So I'll leave it at that, but that shows what IFC can do if it's really trying to be proactive in building leverage where it may not have had leverage.
Thank you. No, thank you, Natalie. And on that note, I think I'm going to weave back to Megan and Anthony about having heard these specific examples from Emmanuel and Natalie about things going well and things not going necessarily perfectly. Could you first, Megan, tell us, how is it during these processes? Is it after the fact? How are we going to be able to measure how should the IFC be assessing the effectiveness of the remedial actions that it's trying to create for these cases?
Yeah, this is a big question, and I don't have super granular, specific, exact KPIs in terms of what those should be, but more a perspective on what needs to be measured, so not necessarily how. But of course, effectiveness of the RAF implementation should mean effectiveness from the perspective of the community seeking remedy. So has the implementation of the RAF resulted in improved outcomes for communities? And of course, that has to start with with improved processes at the IFC, so it absolutely matters that the IFC is doing things differently and that is measured, but it can't end there. IFC can't just be tracking the things that it is doing. It needs to also measure actual impact on communities and should be seeking their feedback. And so in terms of how we should measure success, I'm going to shamelessly borrow from BIC, who have put out some good guiding questions for what the KPIs should measure. I don't know if I saw Carolyn Veazey in the room, but all credit due to her for her work on this. So I'm going to amplify those. But sort of the 4 big questions of what needs to be measured and what would really be helpful for the board at the end of the day to have answers to understand whether this pilot has been successful or not. And so those buckets of questions are, number 1, has the harm stopped? So what are we doing, have the things that we are doing differently actually resulted in a reduction of harm and an end to the negative impacts that the communities are experiencing? Number 2, have communities received tangible remedy? And that's remedy that they themselves recognize as being meaningful. Number 3, have the remedial measures lasted? So have the things that have been put into place actually proved to be an enduring solution to the problem that was complained about? And then finally, number 4, have IFC and MEGA and their clients learned from the harm and changed their behavior? So I'll pass over to Anthony because I know you have more to say about monitoring
Sure. I'll be very, very quick, and I'll just pull on the last question that Megan raised. We have some thoughts about establishing a baseline and making sure that the KPIs manage effectiveness as well as efficiency and process. I'll reserve those for another time. But on the last point, so I come to this work from 16 years at USAID, where I had the luxury of starting, implementing, and then monitoring and evaluating new initiatives a lot. And so you have a new initiative, and it is going to be tracking some unknown unknowns. We don't know where we're going to be at the end of 3 years, and we're not exactly sure what institutional change is going to be have occurred, and we don't actually know what barriers are going to have been in place. So when you're tracking something new, a new initiative where you're anticipating change but you don't know where it is, there's this really great methodology. It's a bit qualitative. It's called Most Significant Change. And what you do is you have a qualitative assessment where an independent evaluator goes around and has conversations with just about anyone who might be in any way related to the implementation of the RAF. That's going to be staff, that's going to be CSOs, it's going to be clients, it's going to be project-affected people and more. And you ask them a pretty basic question: what is the most significant change that has occurred because the RAF existed? And what you're going to get out of that is some interesting anecdotes, but you're going to be able to find some themes too. And the reason you have something open-ended like that is because you actually, at this moment, don't know what you're tracking. So in addition to the efficiency and the effectiveness, you want to understand what institutional changes occurred, and you also want to ask, what barriers existed, what were in place that led the RAF to be maybe less effective than it could have been. So if you do that sort of qualitative assessment at the end and then capture those learnings, that will be able to inform which pieces and whether and how the RAF is extended or changed moving forward. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Anthony. And just so you're prepared, we need you to be at the microphone so we can record, so it could be part of the recording, otherwise we're not going to hear you. So if you want to start lining up if you have questions, we're going to go that probably within the next 5 minutes or less. And on the famous KPI, the key performance indicators, as Megan was saying, and thank you for the plug, Caroline VC, who is going to raise her hand, hopefully, has has led in the creation of a very useful document that is addressing and proposing some of these questions for IFC and for all of us to be able to think about how effective, how valuable the remedial action framework is being. And just before the questions, I wanted to go back to Emmanuel if you had anything to comment on those. Internally, can you tell us, with these very complex cases, is an institutional memory learning? I mean, this experience, and this happens at other accountability mechanisms, where the bank, the institution, has to be a part of the dispute resolution process. So they are present. So after this experience, could you share internally what IFC is? Is there already some learning that is being documented and being reflected back to the rest of the teams, could you say? And if not, maybe it's no, not yet, I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Carla, for the question. I'm not sure exactly how to answer, because right now we say we are still in startup mode. I don't think we have a system where we can say this is, it's up and running, we are recording, tracking everything. But in some of the cases, as Natalie mentioned, also are still on live and ongoing. So, but we'll have to find a way to track and record and listen and learn. I mean, each of the cases has its own set of lessons in terms of implementing the RAF. And that's really what we need to see how we're going to capture that. But I don't have yet a response to that.
Thank you. And I'm going...
I wondered if I could just jump in a little bit in response to something else that Emmanuel said about RCBC before we...
If it could be quick, because we're running out of time, and we still have a final round that I want to give you at the end. Okay, so if you want to take a moment.
If you don't mind, Carla, and I actually suspect Erin is going to speak to this anyway, but, I did want to just come back to, I used my time to speak a little bit about some positive cases, but I did want to raise a couple other cases where we really need to see IFC learning lessons where things have gone wrong. And Emmanuel, you mentioned the RCBC case, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and I think maybe that will segue well into, I imagine, what Erin might want to ask. So this is another financial intermediary case. IFC made 5 repeat investments in a major Filipino commercial bank, in this case, RCBC. And at one point, it had a 12% equity stake and a seat on the board of this commercial bank. So it was really a significant investment, and there was a lot of leverage. And meanwhile, this bank was becoming a leading financier of the coal boom in the Philippines. And of course, coal projects, as they do, were having devastating impacts on the local communities. So along with Recourse and PMCJ, we helped communities file a complaint to the CAO, and this one went to compliance. Now, just to say that ultimately, the CAO investigation found that IFC's due diligence and supervision failures contributed to a situation that led to the harms because it didn't ensure RCBC applied the performance standards to these very high-risk projects. And it recommended that IFC support RCBC to conduct an independent environmental and social gap analysis regarding each power plant to verify compliance with IFC's requirements. And where gaps were identified, it should work with RCBC and its subclients to ensure that instances of harm were remediated. And what was really important is that the CAO also said, in doing this, IFC should consider ways to maximise its positive influence on the corporate owners and financiers of each power plant, as well as contributing to remedial solutions as appropriate. Now, communities in this case have received nothing, no remedy. So, I do want to quickly just address what IFC did and didn't do to get us to this point where there really has been no remedy.
Really, there's a lot of people in that.
Okay. Well, maybe just to say that, IFC started doing the right thing in this case. It was reasonable. It worked with the client to commission a gap analysis by an independent expert. It ended up spending, I think, about $3 million on that consultancy report. We worked very hard, PMCJ worked very hard, the communities worked very hard to input into that gap analysis. But ultimately, it was never disclosed to us, never disclosed publicly, because it turns out that RCBC and IFC signed a non-disclosure agreement with that consulting firm that prevented the disclosure of that gap analysis to the communities, to us, to the complainants. And we only know from a CAO monitoring report there are 186, I think, recommendations to address the issues, but none of that has happened. Now, IFC, we just learned this week, has divested from RCBC and is now seeking to close the map. Now, I think it's really important that we look to what IFC can still be doing and should have done, including working as a One World Bank institution, using the One World Bank approach, to engage with the government and the sub-clients to come up with creative solutions to get funds to the communities and services to the communities. And we really want to see IFC continuing to do that work. So, I will finish now, but it's just such an important case to show the failures of the IFC and what it should be doing under the RAF in future cases differently.
Go ahead, Emmanuel. And
I promise I'm not going to take more than 2 minutes. There's just a couple of things I want to say. The first one is, Natalie, we had this discussion earlier, but the RAF is complicated. Please don't criticize us because we are trying to do something, even if it fails. Criticize us if we don't do something or if we repeat the mistakes. That's my only plea on that. I don't like the outcome of the case. I don't like it. I already expressed it. I think I was in a panel with Aaron 2 years ago where I already expressed that. But we need to learn our lessons. And just two lessons I want to draw from this case on our side is that, first, this is financial intermediary, but this is financial intermediary not in the context of DIR that you mentioned before. And when your client is a bank and not the project itself, you're always working through an intermediary. And every action we took, depending on RCBC willingness to pass it through project, and what that cooperation broke down, which it did. Our enabling activities could not reach the communities they were meant to serve. And that really a lesson of what does it mean, enabling activities, in the context of AFI. I think we still have to explore that. It also raises a question about what are the boundaries of enabling activities, and we can come back to that. Sorry, Carla. And the last point I want to make in terms of lesson learned is it's about disclosure. We completed the gap analysis, but we couldn't share the finding with the complainants. Not because of NDA, but because of the agreement that was signed between the complainant and the consulting firm doing the studies. That's a very difficult outcome. That's not somebody that we intended, that we wanted at the beginning. And of course, the study were meant to be shared with the complainants. And our lesson learned on our side is that going forward, we need to secure disclosure commitment for clients before we commission the fact-finding, not after. And that's something we already incorporated to the new map we are doing. But we need to learn, listen, and we are trying to do that. Thank you.
This is what it looks like when the moderator loses track of what's happening.
Sorry, Carla.
No.
I apologize.
No. And I know that Aaron is next, but this is and so I just want to point back to the fact that, Emmanuel, you've talked about failures at the IFC already a couple of times. And this is 2026, and when I started working in this space in 2014, that really wasn't happening. we weren't really having these frank conversations then. We weren't even talking about remedy then. It was a very hard conversation to even have. And so I appreciate, Natalie, I appreciate the fact that you continuously, passionately bring back this, and I know, Aaron, you're waiting to bring this as well. And for you, for being here, Emmanuel, for us to have these difficult conversations. But if we don't have them, we're not going to get to the other side. So on that note, Aaron, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Aaron Pedrosa, again, from the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. We filed that complaint mentioned by Natalie, straddling two CAO policies, the old and the new. And the new CAO policy makes reference, or rather the RAF references to the CAO policy. Therefore, our assertion, and I know Emmanuel does not agree, is that the remedial action framework should apply to this case, to the RCBC case. It's in the same document where it says the CAO policy should be enforced. So what CAO policy are we talking about? It's the 2021 CAO policy. But should that not apply? The same RAF says, and this is where we've been urging the IFC to be creative. Enabling activities are expected to be the form of IFC MEGA contribution to remedial action in the majority of cases in which IFC opt to supplement remedial action on the part of clients and other parties. However, the RAF does not preclude IFC from considering and proposing other options for remedial action. Mm-hmm. That is our assertion. Why do you keep on saying it did not work? The policies are there. In your report, you said the maps have been completed. In the CAO report, it says 4 out of 4 work streams are ineffective. To us, the affected communities, the representative of the affected communities, is that you do not seem to work in compliance with the policies. Because the policies are clear. How come you make every justification so that it does not work?
Thank you, Aaron. We'll take 3 questions, or perhaps more, considering the time, and then I'll go back to the panel.
Yeah, sorry, Emmanuel, another question for you, but thank you so much for sharing insights on how this is being implemented. I think it's just really helpful for us. So we know that the name of the game these days is the One World Bank Group approach. And so just a quick question on whether the RAF will apply every time there's IFC money in a One World Bank Group project. It was really great to hear from Maninder yesterday that it will apply to the Bhutan project, the DHPP, for example. So just a quick question on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. Scott Adams with the World Bank Accountability Mechanism Dispute Resolution Service. Thanks for a very interesting discussion so far. My question actually relates a little bit to Stephanie's and to Emmanuel's analogy of the whole house renovation. So working on the public sector side these days, are there any aspects of the RAF that could or should apply if you're looking at leverage and remedy for the IBRD and IDA funded projects? Are there important similarities or differences, things that should take a different approach on the public sector side that can't borrow or don't relate on the private sector side? So any of the panelists who could offer their thoughts on that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Greg.
Hi there, Greg Berry from Accountability Council. To me, the RAF is really an attempt beyond remedy, but to encourage and ensure, in fact, the responsible business conduct of IFC clients. The OECD Development Assistance Committee and the Responsible Business Conduct Committee is engaging in an informal working group to discuss ways that development finance institutions can use their leverage to encourage responsible business conduct. The World Bank Group has not been involved. When asked this week why not, they said it's a matter of capacity. Don't you think that lessons from the RAF could feed into this to facilitate learning and to influence this guidance across the DFI landscape? And can you commit to maybe trying to dedicate some resources to participating in that conversation?
Thank you. My name is Knox. I manage the dispute resolution team at the CAO. I have one comment and a question for Emmanuel. I think the comment that I'd really like to make is that my observation this week has been that there has been a swell in a conversation about whether accountability mechanisms are about accountability or they are actually supposed to provide accountability and remedy. So I find that this conversation has been very rich to sort of just inform that dialogue, because I think accountability without remedy, as has been shared in this room, really doesn't make any sense. So that's my comment. The question that I wanted to say is that, first of all, since 2018, we've been tracking IFC's involvement in dispute resolution cases, and we found, I think maybe they've been observers in maybe about 18, 19 cases over the last years. One of our great challenges with the role that they play as observers is that they're not consistently there. Sometimes they are able to attend, other times they are not able to attend. In other situations, they agree to be observers, but they don't come at all. And we understand when we speak to the IFC that one of the big challenges is bandwidth. Usually it's the ENS people who come and they don't necessarily have bandwidth to attend dispute resolution cases for maybe 14 years for every session that we have. Now, the question I have for you, Emmanuel, is yesterday when we were listening to Meninda, he was talking about a reduction of the ENS staff. And so I'm just wondering how this is going to work if we have found that IFC's participation in these processes is so useful and it helps to provide remedies to communities, but we are then reducing the ENS staff. I feel it's going to put a lot more pressure on this process. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts are in terms of the reasons why currently we can't have consistent participation by IFC and what it's going to look like when we have less people that are working on ENS.
Thank you, Knox. Gabby?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Gabriela Stocks. I lead the compliance function at CAO. I have a lot to say about this panel, but I will stick to one comment, which is on leverage. And it's also sort of a self-interested plug for CAO's advisory function. Doing my job up here. So I think that, I agree with you, Carla. The establishment of the RAF was a watershed moment. And in my view, it's because it created a permission structure for IFC to engage, IFC and MEGA to engage within the institution with its own management, for staff like Emmanuel, to engage with IFC management, to have a conversation about what remedy may look like through the form of enabling activities. And that's been a really important context for this conversation to move forward. That said, I agree with Emmanuel. By the time cases reach compliance, implementing the enabling activities, then the RAF becomes more and more challenging as either the client disappears through exits or as leverage naturally decreases over the life of an investment. Even in the best of circumstances, Emmanuel highlighted the case of Salala. So in the best of circumstances, the establishment of a community development program that will hopefully eventually come to fruition doesn't actually address some of the harms in this case. In CAO's investigation, the harm that was identified was a remedy gap, a financial gap of several $1 million because of underpayment for rubber trees that were cut down when this plantation was expanded. The community development program is not going to remedy that gap. The only thing that would have created remedy in this situation is avoiding the harm in the first place, and that means having adequate leverage during the life of the investment to compel the client to avoid these types of harms. And so I think that one of the really critical components of the RAF is this commitment, IFC's commitment, to explore leverage, to explore new forms of contractual leverage, and to see what more can be done in order to compel client action. So with that, I want to highlight that that CAO's advisory function has just published a new paper on leverage. We hosted a workshop earlier this week, so I encourage you all to go to the website and check it out and keep engaging in this conversation because it's an important element. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. And I know that we have 10 minutes, but we heard that there's no other panel coming in after us. So we could stay here all day, Emmanuel, if you wanted to. But what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do is actually two things. First, and I can't believe that I'm doing this, but I'm going to emphasize the fact that We had arguments when the first drafts of the Remedial Action framework were being proposed, and there was such an emphasis on prevention and preparedness, and saying, but we have, we do our due diligence, we have the performance standards. And so I'm going to actually plug that part of the RAF and say, avoiding harm is the best way to avoid these issues. So there is that part that I think shouldn't be forgotten. And the second thing I'm going to do is actually go to Anthony on the issue of leverage first, and to ask you to share a bit about the contractual language and the recommendations that just came out as part of OHCHR's recent report, and then we'll weave back to Emmanuel and give him another breath.
Perfect. Okay, I'll be lightning fast. So the second document that we just launched is called A Guide to Contractual Provisions in DFI Financing. It was written by former IFC counsel Motoko Ezawa, very thoughtfully written, very exhaustively researched, and it basically does explore this questions of how can DFIs strengthen their leverage to compel client action through contractual provisions. So in the actual legal contracts between the DFIs and the clients, and basically it offers 10 drafting considerations as well as actual language that can be copied and pasted or considered for the contracts. So a few examples: canceling, suspending, delaying, or conditioning funding and linking it to ENS milestones. That's one. Requiring prepayment or acceleration of borrower payment obligations. Another is no objection approvals for changes to the project budgets, and also, of course, the incorporation of responsible exit frameworks, so we don't get into a situation where there's no client to negotiate with at the end. Another thing that maybe I'll get a chance to talk about later, a concept that's explored is sort of a contingency funding account, or some people call it an escrow account, where there's just access to potential response funds sort of baked into the budget, and that is codified within the contract. So that would only be used for higher risk projects. I actually got to pilot that at USAID, and so there is a model for doing this, which I would think would be appropriate for the IFC to explore. But these are all the sorts of things that can be considered, maybe not for every project, maybe not in every market, maybe not for every type of transaction, but in cases where there's going to be a high-risk project where maybe a harm could be more likely anticipated, and you want to sort of strengthen your leverage up front so that you're preparing and preventing and not actually having to deal with the sorts of conversations that we're having today.
Thank you, Scott. And I know that most of the questions were directed at you, Emmanuel, but before I went to you, I don't know if Megan or Natalie want to address any of the questions that were posed on OECD, yes.
Yeah, maybe just to say really quickly on Scott's question about could the RAF apply to the public sector side. Great question. It's one that we have too, and we haven't done that analysis yet, but I think we're coming at it from the angle of why not? And once we do that analysis, maybe we would find particular places where this doesn't translate very well or would need to be changed. But in terms of just the approach of enabling remedy, this sounds like something really important for any MDB to embrace. And so even if tweaks need to be made, we would certainly hope that as part of a One World Bank approach, that the One World Bank would be actively looking for ways to be able to apply the concepts in the RAF to the public sector side.
Thank you.
I mean, maybe I'll just quickly touch on the comments about leverage again, and also your comments, Carla, about preventative work and preparedness, which we haven't focused on, and I agree is actually very, very important, perhaps even the most important part of what we need to see IFC doing a much better job on. And I talk about cases, but I realise I don't have enough time. But we see, for instance, even in direct investments. For example, the CBG bauxite mine in Guinea, where, had the RAF been applied at the time of that loan, and we had, for instance, provisions in the financing agreement that, required broad community support, or FPIC, and documentation of that before IFC approved the loan, or as a as a condition for disbursements, we could have been in a much better place than we are now. And also, what we definitely didn't see in that case, and the RAF could really help with, is that work that IFC does to analyse the capacity of the client to actually meet the commitments it's making in the financing agreements on E&S issues, and then building that capacity where it doesn't have it. It's really, really important that we see better work from IFC on this. And lastly, remediation of legacy impacts. Often IFC is coming into a project where there have already been harms on communities, and it's crucial that we start seeing IFC using its leverage at the financing stage to ensure those legacy impacts are addressed as a condition for financing.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'll say, if I'll take moderator's prerogative and say, remedy in the public sector, yes, absolutely. Even Banga has said, you know, yes, there should be remedy on the public and private side. And if he says he didn't say it, he did. He said it to me personally. So, it's, and I just wanted to say that, bringing back to what Aaron was saying about the retroactive issue of can it apply or can it not apply. There are institutions, the Inter-American Development Bank is already doing things and it doesn't even have a remedy policy. And it goes back to the willingness of the institution. It goes back to, is there something that we should do? Is it perfect? Was it, you know, as meaningful? Did it change the world? No, it didn't. But these are the incremental things that we have to do. And if the institution is willing to do them, it doesn't matter if it's written down or if it isn't written down on a policy or a piece of paper. It's about a board member saying to a community member, we're sorry for what happened to you. And that is something that, as human beings, we should be moving toward. So I'll go to Manuel.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to respond to. I think you mostly responded to a lot of questions already. On the public sector side, the only thing I wanted to say is that there is a fundamental difference between public and private sector clients. And one of the questions we have to deal with on the private sector is client change all the time. And even when it's the same client, ownership change, and I mean, it's very difficult, very complicated. On the public sector side, it's complicated also because government change, politics. But having spent quite some time at the IDB dealing with governance, it's not the same. It's not the same at all. I mean, we don't have, you never are in a bridge or a CBC situation where you completely lost a client. You always have somebody you can speak with. May not be the same person, may not be same willingness to do things, but you still have somebody you can speak with and do operation with, and you can try to address whatever went wrong in the previous operation to the next operation. On private sector, you cannot do that. When the client left or disappeared, went bankrupt, you are done. And that's a major, that's in my view the reason why remedy is such important in the private sector world. On the public sector, my sense, it's sorry, I'm speaking in French, but I shouldn't. It's happening in a way, it's happening without even saying it's remedy. Mm-hmm. You know, not consistently, not systematically, but it's happening because that's the natural things to do. When you have something went wrong in the previous operation, you try to correct it in the next one. In private sector, it's much more complicated because of the nature of the client. And that's the reason why I think this conversation about remedy really came first in the private sector world. But it's a great question, Scott, on that. On the DR process, and I'm happy to discuss, Knox. We want to be more present as an observer. You know that there are capacity issues, there are number issues, there are staff issues. We need to prioritize where this is the most important we are in. what we can do. It's also at the request of the party. It's not something we can say we want to step in. The party needs to request it. So there are a lot of things, and I'm very happy to continue the conversation on that. There's just one point I wanted to bring more for the conversation here. We talk a lot about the accountability gap in the last 4 years. I just want to bring what I call the timing gap. Community deserve a prompt, effective response, timely response. We cannot wait 5 years, 6 years. And that's what's happening. And I'm talking collectively. I'm not, it's true for the accountability mechanism, it's true for the IFC, it's true for the World Bank. But we need to make sure the system is actually able to function in a way that addresses the community's request promptly. Leverage diminish with time. That, like entropy, it's a physical. We'll be able to do what we can do in terms of building contractual relationship. But the reality, we all know that that's common sense. I mean, when the money is out, you lost a lot of your leverage, whether you say it or you don't say it. And so leverage diminish with time. That's a reality of life. And so we need to think about addressing issue promptly. We cannot continue in a system where we wait 5, 6, 7 years for a map to be developed because we are at the end of the road. That's what I call the timing gap, and to me the timing gap is one will lead to the accountability gap, where it's a key factor in the accountability gap. And we need to think collectively how we address this timing gap at the system. Again, I'm not saying this is this part of this part, but we need to think collectively how we can be more effective in addressing this timely gap, because that doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And in interest of being very respectful of all of you who are here, very punctual, and knowing that you have other sessions to go to, we're leaving a lot of these threads open so you keep reflecting, which was the goal of this session. And for you to not forget that the constant is change, and our responsibility to influence how this change for what the future holds is still there. I know the commitment is very clear and not going anywhere for many of the people in this room. But as I've said before, when we're sitting here in Washington, D.C., this isn't about us. This is about the many communities around the world who are experiencing impacts and harms and who don't have a voice at the table the way that we do here. And so that is what should be moving us at every given moment. So thank you very much for being here today, and thank you to all our speakers, to Natalie, to Megan, Emmanuel, and Anthony. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful last day of your spring meetings.